I'm talking with the Grammy-nominated pianist Simone Dinnerstein, who first came to prominence in 2007 through her iconic recording of Bach's Goldberg Variations. And since that time, she's made upwards of 14 albums, which have topped the Billboard charts. They were also produced by Adam Abeshouse, who we're going to talk about a little bit, but we want to talk about your most recent album first. That is called The Eye is the First Circle. Simona Dinnerstein, thanks for coming on to FM 91.
Thanks so much, Brad.
Now, this is part of a larger project that involves your father's paintings. I wonder if you can tell us, sort of give us the elevator pitch for this album, what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. I basically it comes from a performance piece that I made, which combined elements from my father's Fulbright Triptych. My father is the painter Simon Dinnerstein, and the Fulbright Triptych is a very large painting that he did in the early 1970s, which depicts him on one wing, my mother on another wing, holding myself as a baby, and then the middle panel is my father's studio. And it's really about all the things that influenced my father and my mother back then in their lives. And I put that together with Charles Ives's Concord Sonata, which is a musical work that he wrote based on the writings of the Transcendentalist writers. And I tried to connect the music and my father's painting and create this new work, which I called The Eye is the First Circle.
And where does the title come from? Where does the title
Oh,
come from?
it comes from an essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's an essay called Circles, and that's the opening line of the essay.
Okay. And Ralph Waldo Emerson is the first part of the Concord Sonata, so there's a connection there also.
Yes, he is the first movement. Yeah.
I wonder if
Mhm.
you can tell us a little bit more about the Concord Sonata on its own. I mean, Charles Ives, this is his, I don't know how you say it, but 150th year anniversary.
Yeah. Mhm.
I wonder if you can tell us about your relationship with the music of Charles Ives, and then we talk a little bit about how Charles Ives, what his legacy is, why he's such an iconic composer still 100 years
Mm.
later.
Well, this piece of music I find particularly striking because it has so many different elements in it, which is true of all of Charles Ives's music, but it has the feeling of you can sense the Western canon. You hear bits of Beethoven, you hear bits of Wagner, you hear all of the classical music that influenced Ives and his training as a musician. Um, and then you also hear all of the influences from the popular fabric of his culture, right? You know, you hear marching bands, you hear folk songs, you hear hymns, um, and all of that he mushed together and created his own unique voice as a composer that was really forward looking. I mean, some of the music sounds like Stravinsky, but it was written before Stravinsky became Stravinsky, you know.
Yeah.
And so he was really looking ahead. You know, it's like 21st century music, you know. Also, I think that what I really like about the piece too is that it sounds like a piece, and in fact he did work on it for a very long time. He kept on revising it, and you know, it went through different transformations. Emerson began as a piano concerto, then it became a sonata, you know, like lots of different, he kept on churning over the material. um but it feels like a piece of music that is not static. Like it almost sounds like it's not really quite finished, that you know it's still happening. When you're playing it, you have the sense that it's evolving constantly, and that you know the edges are not sharply delineated. You know, it could keep
Yeah.
going. If he was alive now, he'd keep writing it.
Yeah. I have some old recordings. I have a recording of him actually singing and playing the piano,
Mm,
uh, which I play occasionally.
yeah.
But it's a bit of an acquired taste. I mean, some people will bristle when they hear Charles Ives' name or his music, but it's something that takes a little more effort on our part to try to deconstruct what he was trying to do, and that made up his voice. I wonder if his voice and your father's voice have anything in common, if there's anything that drew you to one of your father's best well-known works, the Fulbright Triptych, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any relationship between the two.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that was really what made me think of the Ives, was that the triptych is it's in many ways a very American painting. There's something about it that is very straight ahead, straight in your face, like there's something almost flat about it. Um, but it depicts on the walls all of these different postcards of Renaissance art and Impressionist art and African art and Indian art and all these different things that were influencing my father. There are lots of different voices in the
Yeah.
painting. And I think that all of those different voices, and also the side by side children's art with Renaissance art, and this idea that in a way there isn't high and low art, that everything around you can be art, um, is something that I think really connects the triptych to the Concord Sonata.
We should mention that your father's triptych is big, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's
a
14
big,
feet wide. Yeah.
yeah. So that makes it a little more understandable, the detail that you can find in that painting. I was struck by something you said in your NPR interview where you talked about the separation of the family members. Like, I know that you weren't even born when he started
Yes.
creating the piece, and then you were 2 years old by the time he finished it. But you talked about the separation of family there, that you're sitting on your mother's lap on one end, and then your father is off on the other end. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah. So that's something that always bothered me about the painting, because the middle panel, the center, the focus of the painting is art. It's my
Mm.
father's studio. And in particular, he's creating a copper plate that he's using as an engraving. He's etching a copper plate to make an engraving. And I found that art, the fact that the art was separating my parents and me from my dad too. Um, I guess that's one way of looking at it. Another way is that we're all focused in on the art together.
Yeah.
But in my performance piece, I did something with the video artist who I was collaborating with, where I had her take my parents in the movement, the third movement, the Alcott's, and I had her bring them together. And so they're sitting next to each other, and they're sitting right next to me. They're projected right next to me as I'm playing, as if they're watching me perform. And that was a very, very meaningful part of the piece for me, to do that with those images.
Did your parents go to the performance?
They did, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite scary having them come.
Did they have anything to say, or
Well,
they
I
just
think they
support
were
you?
really actually really moved by it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that their interpretation of what I did uh maybe was different than what I thought I was doing, but that's always the case with art.
Yeah.
Nobody is watching or listening in the way that somebody else intended them to.
Yeah. Well, your whole concept is so interesting. I mean, you've come up with lots of different concepts through the years for both projects and recordings that are made of those projects, as in this case.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can talk about Adam Abeshouse a little bit, because he was such an integral part of many of your albums for the past several years. I wonder if you can, and he passed away this past October, if people don't know. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your relationship with him and what should listeners know about his contribution to this album?
Yeah, well, Adam Abeshouse produced all of my recordings. So we did 14 albums together. And people don't really know what it means for a classical, what does a classical producer do? Um, well, he was a very unusual producer in that he both produced and engineered and mastered and edited and mastered the recordings, he did everything. So he understood the sort of the technical audio part of it. He was able to capture the most amazing sound. And frankly, the way he captured the sound on this particular recording was kind of genius because I was performing on a piano with no lid on it, which is very hard to record. And because it was a live performance, I didn't want any mics on the stage to be seen. So the mics were on the sides of the stage and the wings, and there was like a little mic inside the piano. So how he made this beautiful sound out of that is extraordinary. But the other thing that producers do, and what Adam did, was he was such an amazing musician. And during the recording sessions, this was different because it was a live recording, so we weren't having a session. But in studio recordings, like the Goldberg Variations, for instance, which is my first recording with him, um, you play things many times, and uh, and he would say, um, "Do you mean to do the phrase like that?" Or, I can't really hear what you're saying here, or tell the story a little differently. Or he'll say, it sounds like you need to get up and walk around the piano now and take a little break, or let's move on to this other spot and then come back. It's like being a therapist as well as being kind of a really great musical ear who's trying to make sure that you are truly communicating everything that you meant to communicate. Um,
Yeah.
so I had I was so fortunate to have so many experiences with him. We traveled, we recorded albums in Havana, Cuba, and Berlin, and Leipzig. Um, and I just can't imagine life without him. He was just such an important part of my life. So it's a terrible loss. He passed way ahead of his time.
Yeah, totally. Such a loss to the classical world and to you who personally worked with him. I wonder, well, I mean, was this the last recording that he engineered? I mean, or produced?
Uh,
He died just a few days really before it was released, right?
yeah, no, we did this. This comes from a performance I gave in 2021.
Okay,
Um, but it was actually the last thing that he recorded of mine. We actually recorded 3 albums during the pandemic, and he came to
right.
my house and recorded them in my house, like in the middle of the night in Brooklyn. You can imagine, it was so quiet that we were able to record albums in my house. And then this was the performance that happened, right as we got out of that period. And so he did it in the theater. And actually, one of the reasons why the audience was so quiet, you never hear anybody cough or anything, is because everybody in the audience was masked. And of
Mm,
course, at that time, nobody dared cough in the audience. You felt really uncomfortable if you heard somebody cough near you. Um,
yeah, people
but
would point at
Adam,
you.
yeah, so when Adam became really ill and as it became clear that he was going to pass away, I just thought it hadn't occurred to me to release this as an audio album. And then I thought this would be perfect to release because it was a very, very personal performance. And he was very supportive of me doing this piece. He really, really wanted me to play the Concord Sonata. And and he talked to me about how the Concord Sonata was like the 20th century equivalent of the Goldberg Variations. And so I felt that for this to be my final release with him would really be special, considering our first one was the Goldberg Variations.
Yeah. Pianist Simone Dinnerstein's latest album is called The Eye is the First Circle, features iconic American composer Charles Ives' Concord Sonata that is on Supertrain Records, released to coincide with Charles Ives' 150th birthday. Simone Dinnerstein, thank you so much for joining us on FM 91.
Thanks so much, Brad. It's great talking with you as always.